Do you have hobbies besides media consumption? I stumbled over this question while doom scrolling Twitter for the third time in a day, and it managed to make me go from feeling pretty much entirely numb to being really agitated in an impressive manner. There's a lot wrong with this getting more of a reaction out of me than most of the other hellish shit I'd read before, but to me, sitting at my desk hunched over, staring at my screen for hours after having stared at my laptop for hours prior, this had suddenly gotten a bit too personal. The irony is, the question's not inherently accusatory. That is, if you remove any context from it. But that's not quite right, is it? So I'll inject as much context as possible into something you didn't even care much about to begin with, and I hope you stick around. And you know what? No, I haven't been doing all that much besides consuming media in my free time, but I only slightly regret it, and here's why. This isn't everybody's thing, but I like relating to the topic first before following that up with more generalized observations. If you don't care about my perspective on the far too limited idea of creativity or creative hobbies, feel free to skip ahead, and to the rest, be my guest. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in design, and have been studying and working as a designer since 2016. Before that, I was the art kid. Yeah, I'm dragging myself by saying that. Many people have called me a creative person throughout my life. Those people usually being the ones that didn't think of themselves as creative at all and entirely removed from that scene. And that's sad. This isn't me calling them ignorant, but calling the propagated image of creativity both limiting and limited. We've been conditioned to have such a narrow view of creativity that people don't even dare to associate themselves with it. It's something exclusive, almost sacred, and while there's definitely a breed of creative person that likes thinking of themselves as special, that's not reflective of reality. Even if we look only at visual creative work, the difference between an artist's and a designer's creativity is already huge. Using the common metric of creativity, whatever the fuck that is, the designer wouldn't measure up at all, because creativity goes way beyond artistic talent. The creativity most people think of is actually imagination or fantasy, while the more universal, and in my opinion more accurate definition is the ability to solve problems, which is not at all limited to art. Somebody coming up with an idea to solve a medical issue based on years of research, or somebody choosing the color blue because it fits the brief, which is also based on color theory and cultural context, by the way, is the same thing in terms of creativity. There's a problem, life-threatening, personal, or whatever, and we provide a new solution. The only difference is that the designer's work doesn't matter. We like believing that we know what simple words like creativity mean, but sometimes our definitions are just one of many, and a limited one at that, which in turn limits us. Creativity is diverse. There are many ways to be creative and many areas to be creative in. On the flip side, most creative people's creativity is limited to only a few skills. The universally creative person is as rare as the universally uncreative person. So, from the bottom of my heart, I'd love if more people that consider themselves uncreative would reclaim that word and allow themselves to venture into a sphere they didn't think they belonged to. Don't get me wrong, I'm not delusional. Obviously, there are jobs that require less creative skills than others, but nobody would reduce themselves down to their careers, right? That would be ridiculous. Most of us had some after-school activity unrelated to academics. Music, sports, art, just hanging out with people. Once we start working or doing anything resembling a full-time occupation, that kind of just stops. For me, consuming and reproducing study material was my work. Creative activities like drawing were my hobby. Since then, the roles have been reversed. I do creative things for work, while my hobbies have shifted towards mostly consuming various types of media, something most of you can probably relate to in one way or another. However, again, I believe one big misconception lies in the language we use to describe things. We've been made to believe that creation and consumption are opposites of each other, which, quite frankly, they're not. Antonyms of creation are destruction or abolition. For creativity, they're unoriginality or uselessness. Antonyms of consumption or consuming are collecting or saving. So let's not use them interchangeably to satisfy a weird complex we only develop because of social media. Just a thought. To demonstrate, creative hobbies are probably things like drawing, making music, writing, maybe gardening, while reading, watching movies, listening to music, and so on would be considered consumptive hobbies. Where do we place working out? Dancing, hiking, playing games? Nowhere, because the scale from creative to consumptive is really, really dumb. And I think what the people making that distinction actually mean is separating between digital and non-digital activities, while ironically hoping their digital content goes viral so they can feel good about themselves for receiving validation, even though the point they're making is frustratingly superficial and doesn't hold up in the slightest if you take even as much as 4 seconds to reflect on it. So here's the way I look at it when I start feeling unfulfilled or like I'm wasting my life away. How much do I invest and gain from this activity? And this can differ. Reading is generally viewed as a rather passive activity, essentially just having a story told to you, then closing the book and moving on with your day. But the reader chose to invest time out of their day to open that book in the first place. They were willing to open their mind up to another person's story, and they might carry lessons from that story into their day or even into their life. Maybe they'll seek out discussion with other people about the book, with friends or family, online or in a book club. And I don't think that's passive at all. Of course, this amount of personal investment is not the norm, and frankly, not whole books are that deep. But the benefits of reading can be huge. And now watch me go even further. I don't think that's limited to books or reading high literature. A tweet can do the same thing for a person. Not to sell spending hours on social media as a productive hobby, but I'm rather tired of it widely being portrayed as a useless way of using your free time, or an inherently terrible way of educating yourself. It most definitely shouldn't end with Twitter, of course, but it's an amazing place to start, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Obviously, more quote-unquote active hobbies like crafting, playing an instrument, or working out are amazing for many reasons. For engaging different parts of your brain, expanding your knowledge, or maybe circle of friends, establishing a work-life balance by having a clear distinction between work and free time. And these kinds of hobbies produce results you can see, results that matter to you, something that you can look at and say, I did that, and I did it for myself only. And that's great, because yes, activities outside of media consumption are in fact highly recommendable. However, let's not lie to ourselves. Finding and maintaining a hobby is really hard. At least initially, most hobbies require the investment of either time or money, both not something many people have a lot of. And even if they do, hobbies require commitment. Committing yourself to anything is pretty fucking difficult. Committing yourself to something for your own sake? That's where you're gonna lose a lot of people. Because here's where the other bad C word comes into play. Cunt. Kidding, it's capitalism. Having hobbies today is a privilege, not the feel-good thing they used to be as kids, which is entirely fucked up, by the way, and not at all how it should be, but it is many people's reality, and the reason why I hate how we dismiss and look down on how they use their free time. That life has become almost unbearable for many these past years, sadly, is a pretty fair statement to make. We also live in a world where easily digestible content is available at all times. It's not just easy for us to turn it on after returning home from a day at school or work. That's literally the point. We're supposed to do that. I also want to mention that many hobbies were explicitly exclusionary of marginalized communities, which still shows its effects today. I'm not even just talking rich white people sport like golf or polo or horseback riding, but also things like music or art lessons, ballet, theater, and so on. These kinds of activities are not only expensive, but also rarely located in lower income neighborhoods. This particularly affects Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities living under the effects of systemic racism, as well as other marginalized groups subjected to workplace discrimination or various other reasons for less financial affluence. But even if money's not an issue, the lack of diversity can discourage people from even attempting certain hobbies because they seem so exclusive to white middle-class people. That's another huge-ass topic, so this is more of a sloppy summary, but yeah, this is also about race. And I'm sure the why do we have to make everything about race people are loving that, but listen up, fuckers. It's time for all of us pale people to face the fact that the color of our skin significantly influences the way we're able to live our lives. You may not realize it because, as a white person, you're the one whose path is being cleared of race-related struggles. But everything being about race is not some leftist mantra, but the world we live in. Everything is about race. Acknowledging that is the bare minimum. The goal of most media has always been providing escapism. It invites us to leave our own reality behind and enter a new world, another person's life, or a different time. It shows us what we desire or what we fear. It inspires us to want more or serves as a reminder to be grateful for what we currently have. Miserable people are the best audience for that. It sounds counterintuitive, but there was a huge increase in movie production during World War II. Of course, to spread propaganda, but also to keep civilians suffering from the effects of war as entertained and therefore as distracted as possible. They were made to believe that the country that was failing them was actually still serving them by providing entertainment. And that's exactly what's happening right now. With our current reality becoming so horrendous, the increase in media is the logical and strategic consequence. And for far too many people, this is the only accessible way of escaping the hardships they're confronted with every single day of their life. We watch movies, shows, reality TV, YouTube videos, we read, listen to music, all to drown out the thoughts of impending doom, dread, and emptiness. We play games to become somebody else, somebody whose actions seem to matter. Escapism. It's a wonderful thing, and it's a coping mechanism literally served to us on a silver platter. Why wouldn't we say yes? Of course, there's plenty of media out there with the more sincere motive behind its creation. Many movies have been made and books have been written that expose and criticize the fuckery of our world. But are those the stories selling out movie theaters or breaking streaming records? We see this all the time now. As soon as a political message is made blatantly and not camouflaged with superheroes or spaceships, people literally start throwing a hissy fit about everything being woke nowadays and boycott it. Should those people be taken seriously? No, they're morons and too far gone, but they're also an audience that streaming platforms and film studios don't want to miss out on. So the projects with the most budget willingly put into them will avoid being too political, or at least from being too direct in their messaging. The goal is, and always has been, to reach the widest audience possible, and getting them to put money into movie tickets or monthly streaming fees, or having them stay on social media as long as possible to potentially click one of the million ads in their feed. They are ruthlessly taking advantage of our exhaustion and need for distraction that makes us content with superficial bullshit media with no backbone whatsoever. We are working ourselves to the bones for a system that doesn't work for us, and its provision of mostly stale entertainment is meant to make us forget about it. And it gets worse. It's supposed to make us believe that this same system can actually work if we work hard enough, or if we're lucky. It frames itself as motivational or uplifting, or it can be a source of feeling superior, particularly when it comes to reality TV and documentaries. Because watching terrible people doing terrible things makes us feel pretty great about ourselves. I won't deny it, and if you're honest to yourselves, you can't either. And you know what? That's valid. Watch the content you want to watch and watch as much of it as you need to, because I know other options are simply not available for many. But I'll be that annoying person and also say, many refuse to acknowledge that we do, to a degree, have control over how we deal with problems, even if the source of the problem itself is out of our control. Is doing that much harder for some people due to mental or physical health or financial struggles? Absolutely. But it's rarely entirely impossible. In general, I think it would benefit many people to establish a distinction between the world and their world. The world is going to hell, and you live in it, sure. That doesn't immediately equal your world, though. You can, and you should, still make an effort to live a happy and fulfilled life, and that means holding yourself accountable because you owe it to yourself. I know that I mentioned before that committing yourself to something for your own sake is really hard, but you're the only one that can do it. And I do think you deserve it, and I hope you believe you deserve it too, because you do. And if you don't, I'm here saying, you deserve the best. I don't know how to end this. The focus of this video won't be on pop culture though, because honestly, I don't actually have the attention span for movies anymore, and there are great people on this very platform that cover all these things better than I ever could. If I remember, I'll link a few channels down below. If not, I'm sure you'll find them. Personally, I'm more interested in the use of social media because that's just more relevant and fascinating to me. And amazingly, the king himself, D'Angelo Wallace, returned when I didn't even know I needed him and provided really enlightening input for this topic. I'm also kind of exposing how long I've been writing this script. I apologize. I do procrastinate. I did spend a lot of time just scrolling. Listen, we're all in this boat together, okay? I highly recommend checking the whole video out to get a hit of his full wisdom, but the main point I found extremely relevant was D'Angelo describing how both media consumption as well as creation turned into unhealthy coping strategies to deal with anxiety and depression. Feeling depressed is a haunting and frustratingly abstract sensation. which isn't something most people can articulate, especially not in the period of acute pain. So consciously or unconsciously, I think it's not only pretty common, but actually quite plausible for us to attempt translating our vague feelings of pain into literal pain, into something that's tangible and seems like a valid explanation for our indistinct lack of happiness. This misery validation is not necessarily a healthy, but an undeniably comprehensible coping mechanism. Because, and this is also brought up in D'Angelo's video, depression is not as straightforward as it's often depicted. For many, depression is not the feeling of constant sadness. Instead, depression is just total emptiness. Not feeling anything at all except a dull sense of loss because you did lose something. You no longer have access to your emotions, and let me tell you, that is not only concerning but also very confusing. Emotions are what we believe makes us human. When we feel like we lose them, we feel like we've lost part of our humanity. We feel detached and alienated from the world and from others, and we want to be because we clearly don't fit in anymore. We're not like them anymore. They won't understand us. But that's not truly what we want, is it? You don't want to be alone, but you do. But that's the whole thing, right? You don't really know. Not only are you in a dark place, you're confused about everything surrounding it and you and others. So finding a logical explanation for at least one of those confusing clusters makes a lot of sense, no? Not only to cope with it for ourselves, but also in order to have a satisfactory explanation for other people. Feeling bad for no apparent reason versus feeling bad because millions of people's rights are being taken away daily seem like two very different scenarios. The first one being vague and to an outsider in need of further clarification, while the latter is a pretty straightforward statement with cause and effect. It's kind of like wrapping up a weirdly shaped present. You either struggle to put wrapping paper around it, or you just opt for a box to impress the recipient. That you don't actually want to give it to them in the first place becomes secondary, but maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe other people don't actually matter that much in your pursuit of health and inner peace. Me saying that won't change deeply ingrained beliefs you have, but I hate to say it, but the best advice is usually the most mundane shit ever. It has to be sincere. And I am sincerely telling you that other people's opinion on your mental health or your mental well-being does not matter. And once you stop believing that it does, you're able to focus on yourself, and that is exactly what you have to do. Now, here's where things get interesting. Actively seeking out content that makes us feel like shit isn't at all limited to obviously upsetting media. Quite the contrary, actually, especially in regards to the question from the start. Media is often used to distract from the blatant terribleness of the world. However, many, especially young people, unconsciously consume media that plants seeds of insecurity and makes them feel increasingly bad about themselves, while falsely believing it to be motivational or inspirational. This, of course, excludes seeking out content to trigger oneself with, like pro-eating disorder or self-harm imagery. I'd be biting off way more than I can chew, though, if I tried to tackle that topic as well. This behavior in most cases is driven by somebody's mental illness, or sometimes people's morbid curiosity, but especially those creating those images or videos or that content are most likely extremely ill. And I wish for them to get the attention and professional help that they clearly need. I don't condone any of that imagery being made and being made public for other people to consume and trigger themselves with, but I do realize that illness makes people do very questionable things, and all I can hope for is that they get better. The second scenario is similar to misery validation, and both can end in serious mental illness, but purposefully consuming content, although it makes us feel insecure, and in doing that creating a sense of unhappiness, opposed to consuming content to validate a pre-existing compromised mental state, are two different situations that require two different discussions. Mental illness as a precondition compared to it as a result of an individual's behavior is an important distinction. Though mental illness due to social media is becoming a widespread problem, it can potentially be prevented by simply becoming aware of the power we hold in the situation and changing the way we consume and interact with social media. Sounds easy, is not easy. It is that simple though. There's a model about the 6 stages of making intentional change called transtheoretical model by James O. Prochaska? Prochasta? I don't fucking know. This model is mostly used when it comes to implementing healthy behaviors, very often in the context of substance reliances like alcohol and tobacco. And of these 6 phases, literally the first 3 are all about acknowledging the problem existing at all. The phrase raising awareness kind of makes me gag a little bit, but it really is the essential first step. Just a thought on the side here, but I feel like by making all these terms and phrases lame and refusing to use them, we're really running out of ways to clearly communicate and get a point across. Is it because I'm getting older and slowly but surely losing touch with like the lingo young people use nowadays? Or is this actually an issue we should be thinking about? Much to consider. The extremely abbreviated version of this model is as follows. Step 1 is the pre-contemplation, essentially being unaware of an issue at all and of a change needing to happen. Step 2 is contemplation, which is becoming aware of the problem and also seeing the need for change. And then step 3 is the preparation, which is essentially coming up with a plan how to change. For example, making the resolution to not spend more than 30 minutes on Twitter, or going for a walk every day, or something like that. Only in step 4 do you actually do the things. Step 5 is maintenance. So because this is used often in like the context of rehab, this can also be about people overcoming or learning how to cope with potential triggers. This is kind of the phase where a lot of relapses could happen until they maybe get to stage 6, which is termination, and this is when a person has achieved long-term behavioral change. Really important to mention, this is a theory, not hard facts, and this model is not linear. After years of a successful change of behavior, we can still relapse. We can make resolutions and never actually follow through, or we can literally forget about problems and never progress past phase 2. But generally, I find this model quite interesting, especially as I was constantly asking myself why I was investing hours into the script at all. This video is essentially somewhere between step 1 and 2, possibly giving you some ideas for step 3, and that's pretty much where my influence ends anyway. If you clicked on this, you're probably at least vaguely aware of the problem I'm kind of trying to highlight here. If that's the case, congratulations. If you're not aware, here you go. Teenagers, or anybody really, will follow Instagram models or self-proclaimed fitness experts, believing this to be motivational or educational content, while slowly but surely becoming more and more self-conscious, dreading their idol's next beach photo, but also almost looking forward to microanalyzing every aspect of that person's body and comparing it to the ugly lump of flesh that they see themselves as. While a part of us is highly aware of the pain it causes, the other part craves it. We learn what our supposed flaws are online, and are then fed further content to confirm an insecurity we didn't even have. The sick part is, sometimes this confirmation of us being complete and utter shit is the only certainty we seem to have about anything, so we just keep going back for more. Self-hatred becomes the one constant in our lives. It's a coping strategy, the mind's short-term solutions with unfortunate long-term effects. Mental illness is that rock saving us from being dragged away by the current, which is whatever the fuck we're dealing with in life. It's uncomfortable, it hurts, clinging to it for dear life will probably cause bruises and scars, but it is the one thing saving us. As wrong as it sounds, because the common, and not incorrect, just kind of oversimplified narrative is that mental illness is the cause of all problems, which it most definitely can be, but I have to disagree in some cases. It serves a purpose, but humans are flawed, and so are our coping strategies. By successfully manipulating our environment, therefore essentially stopping human evolution, we really fucked ourselves over, or at least a certain group of overly privileged people have. The world we're building no longer serves us, but we also don't have any strategies to navigate it. Social media has only increased people's needs to cope, and the only solution offered to us is more fucking content. But consuming media is never like peeking through an open window. Instead, the window is closed and our reflection always slightly obscures the view. We watch somebody living in luxury while our shitty apartment is reflected right back at us. Of course, this might motivate some, pique an interest, introduce them to options they didn't even know existed. And seeing people succeed can be a wonderful thing. I genuinely want everybody to succeed as long as they're not absolutely horrible people. But even the best of us will feel some type of way if we constantly watch people living the lives we want, but will most likely never have. most of us end up in a 9 to 5 job, working at least 40 hours a week for the majority of our lives? Yeah. Will there be an increase in the quantity and the types of media for us to consume? Most definitely, yes. And will that partially be to distract us from capitalism commanding increasingly more from us, while only compensating us with shit media to dull our senses? Yeah. No matter what we read or watch, good or bad, utopian, realistic, dystopian, we're stuck in a pretty fucked up system. The only thing we still have enough energy for is scrolling habitually, obsessively, to forget about what awaits us when we put the phone down. Is one way of looking at it. This is not an individual struggle. This should not be your problem. It's collectively our problem, humanity's problem, that is being passed off to individuals, as all systemic problems are. So people in positions of power don't have to think about it and can golf instead. But let's not paint ourselves as these defenseless creatures that can only endure it. Most of us are very capable of making informed decisions by being critical of the world we were born into and the people ruling it. It will get harder to find time and energy to commit yourself to more proactive hobbies. And in turn, it will get more and more tempting to just engage with what is clearly made to be engaged with. And for many, that will be the only thing that gets them through the day. Financial concerns, bad infrastructure, the lack of time and energy, illness, physical or mental. You'd have to be a real piece of shit to not acknowledge those as valid reasons for the lack of real hobbies. But don't think of yourself as weaker and more powerless than you are. If you're not valued by this ominous system we are part of, at least value yourself. Unsurprisingly, I don't have an answer to a systemic problem. However, I can share a kind of mantra that's at least given me a new perspective on it. While I'm just as, or even more hopelessly addicted to screens of all sizes as the next person, this outlook has actually motivated me quite a bit to return to and find new hobbies or other activities to do as well. While the majority of us will serve others for most of our lives, parents, teachers, employers, when we decide to go out for a walk, not to go anywhere or do anything, just walk aimlessly for an hour. Or when we read, not for educational purposes, but out of personal interest, we're committing a mini act of rebellion. Sure, we may have purchased the book benefiting somebody else, but the time spent reading is ours, and we made the conscious choice to remove ourselves from the world that relentlessly demands something from us. We made the choice to go out for that walk, to observe our surroundings that we don't even look at anymore. In a world that expects constant engagement with somebody or something, directly or indirectly, in real life or digitally, not doing that is pretty radical. Obviously not the kind of radical that will change the root of the problem, but believing that everything you do has to fall under that category is an incredibly exhausting way to live, and please don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. There's a huge societal battle going on that optimally we'd be fighting collectively, although that's more wishful thinking than reality. But every one of us has their own battle to face as well. And if staring out of the window for prolonged periods of time is the way you can win it, or at least take a break before you get back to fighting, then by all means do it. And yes, scrolling Twitter can be part of that, or watching movies and reality TV. But also consider removing yourselves from the constant waves of content every now and again. Maybe you'll discover some cool things about yourself, and if it's not cool, it's probably all the more important for you to listen. Life is hard because we have to live it, but we all have an average of 80 plus years, so why not make it a decent time? I don't know you, but you're probably a much more amazing person than you give yourself credit for, and I want to see you doing well, okay? I really mean it. And now, do your thing, my friend. Sorry for occupying however many minutes this is. Thank you from the bottom of my heart if you did watch all of it. It means a lot. It took me a hot minute to finish writing this, because creativity is not an endless resource at all. Anybody who claims the opposite and who is constantly hustling, bitch, they're lying. Although structure and habit do wonders, but those are both things I have not established for myself, so fuck me. I might just dip after uploading this video because receiving direct feedback to your work is pretty scary, but I'll try to stay on top of it this time. I really do appreciate all of your comments. If you ever left one, thank you so much. I'll fucking answer this time, I swear. I'll try my best. I really will. Well, I hope you've been well, or that you continue to be well, or that you get better soon if you're in a hard place. Thank you for sticking around if you have subscribed some months ago. And to anybody watching this, honestly, thank you so much. Do your best. You got whatever you have to have got. Have a wonderful day. Please stay safe, stay healthy,